We're here today to test out Looker's new Explore Assistant extension. This is something that they talked about and demoed a little at Google Cloud Next a few weeks ago. And we've taken the last couple of days to kick the tires on it here at Spectacles and really want to show you it in another demo, but really almost more so talk about like what it's doing behind the scenes and how you might be able to replicate some of what it's doing and build your own AI experiences, LLM, conversational analytics experiences on top of Looker. And so that's what we're going to get into over the next kind of 30 to 45 minutes or so. Question has come in, will the session be recorded? Yes, this will be recorded. You'll be able to see it on our YouTube channel. We also post it to our website. It should be by tomorrow midday if you head to spectacles.dev. So these will always be recorded. And you'll always be able to watch them back, as I'm sure you're going to want to over and over. All right, who am I? My name's Dylan Atlas Baker. I'm one of the co-founders here at Spectacles. I have spent the better part of the last decade working on Looker. I was part of one of the first big enterprise rollouts of Looker in 2016 in Europe. And I then went freelance for a number of years and have helped very large companies deploy Looker at scale. And a couple of years ago, my co-founders and I started Spectacles to really solve all the problems that we were having in our kind of data pipeline work. And that is how we came to start Spectacles. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time or joining us for the first time in a while, we do this webinar series focused on Looker topics every other week. So it's typically this time, every other Wednesday. We've taken a bit of a hiatus on Q1. But you can watch all of our backlog on our YouTube channel and on our website. And we will now be doing these again every 2 weeks for the foreseeable future. So we have one queued up for next week, in 2 weeks' time, which is all about getting your LookML ready for Gen AI and conversational analytics. So it ties in really closely with the topics that we're going to be talking about today. Today is really about like how you deploy conversational analytics, and tomorrow, next or in 2 weeks' time, is really about like how you get that LookML ready in and of itself. And so please join us. The event's already live on LinkedIn, on our website, so you can go there, register, make sure you get a notification. So without further ado, let's jump into the core of today's presentation. So what we're going to cover today is what the Explore Assistant is and is not, maybe even most importantly. We're going to jump into a demo of it. We're going to go through what it looks like to actually install this extension on your Looker instance. And then I'm just going to talk about a couple kind of like things that people might want to think about as like next steps to something like this as they kind of think about what deploying an LLM AI type solution on top of Looker might look like. Perfect. Let's jump in. So what is the Explore Assistant? The Explore Assistant is a Looker extension. So it is an extension that you can install on your Looker instance that gives you the ability to generate a prompt and to get data back. This is kind of the thing that I think many of us have maybe wanted for a long time, is the ability to not have to write a SQL query or even like click buttons in Looker. It's really just type the thing that I want and get data back. This is an extension that is not like a core part of the Looker product. This is a thing that you can manually install, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But it does allow you to get a taste of what conversational analytics might look like on Looker, and kind of prime you to think about what building something like this yourself for different use cases that you might have looks like, because there's a lot that we can see under the hood for this because it's all open source as to like exactly what's happening and how it is doing these things. And that's a lot of what I want to focus on today is partly just like testing it, demoing it, and showing how it works, but particularly that like how it works bit, looking under the hood and saying like, this is how you could do similar types of stuff yourself and kind of tweak it to your own use case if you needed to. So as I said, the Explore Assistant is an example of what can be achieved. It uses Looker's extension framework, which you may be familiar with if you've used any of their extensions before, things like the Data Dictionary, the API Explorer, those all use the extension framework. And it uses Vertex AI. If you're not familiar with Vertex AI is GCP's platform for helping you train and deploy AI models. So it's not to be confused with Gemini, which is kind of their like ready to go ChatGPT like service. Vertex AI is a platform that allows you to deploy things like Gemini, and you can actually use the Gemini model in Vertex AI, which is actually what we're going to see today. So if you're not familiar with it, don't worry about it. You're not doing anything wrong. It's both reasonably new and like not necessarily core to your job. If your job is like analytics engineering or Looker focused stuff, you're not necessarily supposed to know what Vertex AI is. But this extension uses those three tools: Looker's extension framework, and Vertex AI. It can be installed in your Looker instance today, but it is not what you may have seen advertised at Google Cloud Next, which is their like conversational analytics tool, which is functionality that will be coming out on Looker later this year, and they'll be doing a whole bunch of stuff about. This is really an example of what you can do with these building blocks rather than the kind of like native functionality that is going to come later this year. And somewhat because of that, it requires manual installation. So this is not a thing that you can just click in the top right corner of your Looker instance and just like click install. There is a slightly more involved manual installation that we are going to talk about later today. So on that note, I'm going to jump in, and I figured where I want to start is just like show you how it works, because we're kind of going to work backwards from there. I'm going to jump in and ask some questions of the AI. We're going to start looking at how it's doing what it's doing, and then we're going to look at what installing it actually looks like, because that'll make more sense once we kind of have a better sense of what it's doing as a tool. So first time using this new streaming platform, hopefully that'll take me straight over to my screen share, which it looks like it has. So this UI is maybe somewhat of what you've expected. I mean, you've seen a screenshot earlier in this presentation. There's a prompt over on the left-hand side, or the ability to enter a prompt, and a UI where you can get the results. There's a couple other things here. You can see a history of things that I've been asking it. You get some sample prompts. This UI is it's written in React, and it is all part of the extension framework part of this application. All of this code is in GitHub, and I will point that out later in this presentation and kind of show you where to go find it. But this is all configurable. So because you install this yourself manually, you can really take this and do whatever you want with it. Now, the way the Explorer system is set up today is that you build it and deploy it for a single Explorer in your instance. So when I am asking questions of it here in this prompt, I'm asking questions of a single Explorer. Now, you can deploy it multiple times with multiple different Explorers and things like that. But right now, we're going to be asking questions of a single Explorer, and that's really how it's set up today. So I'm going to start by asking a question like total users by first purchase date for users who first purchased in 2022. It's going to take a second. Let me just do that. There we go. And hopefully, if everything's working well, live demos are always a little stressful. There we go. We get some data back. And so you can see a whole bunch of things here. You can see that it is filtering on user facts, first order years, 2022. It's done that correctly. It has chosen a visualization for us. It's chosen a line graph, and we can see on each day how many we have. And we can see the data. And so it shows us the underlying data, and we can see that it's chosen the user facts, first order date, and the users count. Now, what you might notice is that I hadn't explicitly said, count in my prompt. I hadn't said first order date. I used the word purchase. And so it knows, in ways that I will explain in a second, how to build these queries. And so I can then refine this if I wanted to. It gave me this visualization. This is a little noisy. So I might actually want it, let's say, by month. And that's going to do its thing. And it will come back in just a second. And then I might say, well, that's great, but I really want it visualized as a bar chart. And so I'm going to do that again. And interesting to see what it's doing here. It has added the user ID into this query. And so not all of the time, in the way that we've all seen a an LLM hallucinate a little. There will be occasions like this where you use something like this, where it is not 100% getting it right. It is possible that if I just change the prompt, no guarantee, but sometimes if you just change the prompt, it'll get it right. I'm going to talk in a second about the training or how this is getting to what we expect it to do, which is how you're going to guarantee that these results get closer and closer to exactly what you want. But worth noting that, one, this is a thing that you kind of have to deploy yourself, that is configurable and that uses your own training data, which I'm going to talk about. And so it is not always guaranteed to work in the way that you expect. And you may want to think about that when you think about what this kind of QA for these things that you might deploy yourselves might look like. So we can see if I just put bar chart, it does actually do it correctly. And then what I actually want, what I was thinking is a column chart, because that's how I like to see the dates along the x-axis. And we get that as well. And so this can be really useful for organizations who want to onboard people to Looker more easily, or want to provide a like a UI that allows people to ask questions just in natural language and get data back from Looker. You can then explore from here. You can add fields. I could limit things. I could filter for a specific month. You kind of have, in this case, the full explore capabilities of Looker. So you can use it as just a jumping off point, which even some power users might want to use. But what's nice is you can go from kind of text to visualization and then kind of tweak as you go. Now, what I really want to focus on here is how it is doing this. And so if I open up my console, we're going to see exactly what is going to the LLM. And so what happens here in this UI, let me just move this a little, sorry, is that it is building a prompt. It is sending that prompt to the model that we have built with Vertex, that in my case happens to be deployed in BigQuery, which is a really cool thing that Vertex can now do as of Google Cloud Next, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But it builds a prompt, it gets data back from the prompt, and it builds a query based on that. And so what I want to just do is walk through this query and talk about kind of exactly what's happening. So all of this here that I've just highlighted, this kind of whole bit, and as we scroll down, is what is being sent to, in this case, Gemini, the model that is being used in Vertex, to generate the query. And so you can see that there's a couple different bits to it. There is context that is hard-coded that says, you're a developer who would translate questions to a structured Looker URL query based on the following instructions. Choose only fields in the below LookML metadata. Prioritize the field description, label tags, and name for what fields to use for a given description. Generate only one answer, no more. Use examples for guidance on how to structure LookML URL query, and never respond with SQL. Always return a Looker explore URL as a single string. And so you can see that we're providing some context, and then we're providing a bunch of LookML metadata. And so we're basically providing, the way this works is it grabs every dimension in this explore and passes them through in the prompt. So you can see dimensions used to group information by, and it has some instructions. And then if we scroll down and I click show more, there's a lot of dimensions here. And then we have measures, and it says measures are used to perform calculations. It provides all of those. And then it has really kind of like, I think to some degree, the secret sauce of this, which is examples. And so what you can see here is you have an example input like top 10 brands by sales, and you have an output, which is this string here, which is fields and a list of fields, sorts and a list of sorts here, and limit and column limit and things like that. And so you can see that we've provided a bunch of these. And so as part of the installation and the deployment of the Explore Assistant, you generate and then upload a whole bunch of examples. You say, hey, when I say top 10 brands by sale, these are the things that I want. And if you're not familiar with this, this is actually the URL query param syntax for Looker. So if you copied this onto the end of an Explore URL, it would generate that specific query. And so the way this works is it basically says, hey, if I ask for this, I want you to generate something in this format, return it to me, and then we're going to visualize that. And so you can see there's about, I think, 20 or 30 examples in here of different things. How should I determine my most loyal customers? Which of these customers have made a purchase in the last 30 days? And for every question, we get a URL string that generates a query within Looker. And then finally, you have the input and kind of the prompt, which is to generate the output. And so what's really interesting here is that this isn't a pre-trained model. Like, we haven't built a model like Gemini that has been trained on this data. We're actually just using a standard Gemini ChatGPT-like service, and we're putting all of the context and using a method called prompt stuffing. We're basically putting it all in the single prompt and telling it to give something back to us. And so what's really cool is you could imagine doing this yourself. It wouldn't, with a bit of typically Python code in my case, or whatever it might be for yourself, you can imagine hitting the Looker API to get all the dimensions and measures, have a file where you've generated a bunch of examples, and then ask a question of it and get this field, construct the URL, and just load it in your browser. Now, it's, that's moderately complex work. I don't want to diminish what I've just described, but it's really a couple API calls to Looker. It's a bit of code, string interpolation for in whatever language you use, and sending an API request to something like Gemini. Gemini Pro is the model that we're using here. And that's kind of like, I think particularly what I want to highlight about this is to some degree, yes, you can build a UI and you can install the Explorer Assistant specifically to test out on your instance if you really want to. But I think what's really cool is that actually under the hood, it's basically just building one big prompt, and with examples, with metadata, with all the context that it needs, and it's getting this URL back here at the bottom, which I realize my headshot is probably over, but you can see a bit of it there. I can hide myself there for a second. There we go. So you can see the full URL and see it there. And so what's cool about this is a couple things that I think are really useful to think about. At no point are you sending any of your data to the large language model. At no point is data from your database being sent to it. All it is getting is the data that you see here, which is examples and metadata about your explorers, none of which is typically that sensitive. I mean, maybe you've put something mildly sensitive in a description or something like that, but typically there's nothing hugely sensitive in those columns. And it means that you can get all of this in a very kind of like secure way, which is really cool. This doesn't involve, like access to BigQuery, whatever database you use, or the LLM to take that information. And the second thing that's cool is it's all in one prompt. You're not having to do any back and forth. You're not having to pre-train a model. So I'm going to talk about later, how this might benefit if you were to do that and what those options might be. But you can really do this all in one go. And so we can see again, if I click, one of the samples here, total revenue by category this year compared to last year in a large line chart with year pivoted, which is a pretty complex, question to ask. It's generating this. It is, again, just putting that question at the bottom of this very long prompt. There's what we asked. And you get this back. And Looker is then able to visualize exactly what you've asked for, which is just the output of this URL param string that you get back at the bottom of the LLM response. I'm just having a quick look at the questions just to see if there's anyone I want to answer now. Can we have access to the history of the prompts done by our users? There is a history tab here, and I actually don't know off the top of my head whether that is my personal, it is definitely inclusive of my personal ones, but it may also include ones from other users in my instance. I actually don't know for sure. Totally honest, I'm the only person who has used this on this instance thus far. So it is just mine, but Charles, I can probably get you the answer to that after the webinar. Can the single Explorer Assistant be utilized for multiple models in Explorer simultaneously? If yes, how? The answer there is unfortunately no. The way this is built today is really to show an example of what this looks like on a single Explorer. And you'll see when we go through the installation walkthrough that you do kind of like build this on an Explorer by Explorer basis. There's going to be lots of things in the future where I'm sure that's not going to be the case. This is not the final state of this type of functionality in Looker. And so I wouldn't kind of like anchor yourself too much on exactly how this thing works versus things that are coming down the path. But today it is only built for a single Explorer. Charles asks, isn't a security concern that this code is available in the browser console in clear? Yeah, again, I don't think this is ready for like a production use case. I think this is just logging out a JavaScript file that I'm going to talk about in a second. I, for what it's worth, am not a front-end expert, and so the security considerations of how you build front-end applications is probably slightly beyond me, and I don't want to go too far into that here. But I would think of this, again, as like a thing to test out and like draw inspiration from, rather than a thing that you want to like productionize tomorrow in your Looker instance. Anthony, I have no idea. So the question is, how many tokens are being used here with such a large prompt? I do not know the answer to that, unfortunately. And I know Josh has commented in the thread as well. I'm going to come back to a couple of these questions later on in the this presentation, but we've also got Jesse in the chat, who I know has been heavily involved in building this, so I think he's also going to do a good job while I continue to present to answer some questions there, but we will have time for explanations and Q&A towards the end. So that is how this works. It is a UI, you put in a prompt, you get something back. And the final thing I want to talk about while I'm here is that the quality of what you're going to get out from something like this is really based to some degree on two things, in my opinion, at least in the current setup of this. It is based on the quality of the like dimensions and measures list that you're providing. If that is like unbelievably large, it may be that the LLM will have more difficulty finding the things that are relevant to your query. So I think like smart Explore design is going to play a major factor in how effective things like this are. And actually, that's going to be a major part of our webinar that we're doing in 2 weeks' time. So like cleaning up unused LookML, things that are never used, that aren't going to be part of these queries, is a really key thing, which I guess shout out Spectacles can help you with. And I think probably the even more important thing is the quality of the examples. Really, I think the power, I haven't like played around with like doubling the size of examples or having it or things like that. But really where you find that something like this hallucinates is where you deviate, where there aren't examples that are like the question that you're asking. And so the quality of the examples that you provide here is a major, major part of how effective something like this is going to be, and something that I think we're all going to have to think about a lot, and how you like generate examples effectively and things like that, and how you label them effectively and all that type of stuff, which I'm going to touch on later and probably more in the webinar in 2 weeks' time. And just, I guess, to answer some of the early questions, Jesse has replied in the chat saying there's 4,000 tokens per request, so a reasonably large number of tokens for a prompt of that size. So on that note, I'm going to head back to the slides. And we're going to jump into the actual installation. I know some people in the chat were asking about, how do we actually install this thing? So all of what I have just used is from this Git repo that I've got a screenshot of here. And if you explore Looker Explore Assistant, you will, maybe GitHub, you will immediately find. And Josh, I can probably ask you to drop a link to it in the chat on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. So all of the instructions that I'm about to go through are from this. Big thanks to all the people from Google and kind of independent people who have contributed to this and helped make the installation as easy as possible. What I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a reasonably high-level overview of what installation looks like. The docs are good. You'll be able to get it working from there. And really what I want to do is like signpost the things to be aware of and really talk about what the constituent parts are more than anything else, and can answer any questions about installation kind of after the fact. I'm about to talk about a whole bunch of things like Terraform, NPM, Google Cloud, connections in Looker, and things like that. If you are not familiar with those terms or comfortable with those terms, do not worry. I'm going to some degree explain what they are as we go, but also this is supposed to be a high-level overview, and you will probably still get value. You will probably still get value from the installation, and it's going to be reasonably quick, and then we will get to kind of further ideas and Q&A at the end. The Explore Assistant is installed in 3 steps, and They are the backend setup, which is either BigQuery or Google Cloud Run. I used BigQuery for when I did it myself. It's just I have spent my life in data warehouses, and so deploying something to BigQuery felt the most natural, and kind of using SQL is the language for doing stuff. But you can deploy this in a couple different ways. There's then the generating and the loading of examples, which you load into BigQuery. And then there's the setup of the front end. And you can kind of think of this as having three constituent parts. One is a backend that runs the model that kind of provides the output that the front end uses. One is the examples that get stuffed into the prompt. And then the third is the front end and all the Looker stuff, which is basically kind of the UI bit that you saw just now in the walkthrough. I would recommend installing them in this order. When I was going through this, I found it to be the most kind of like sensible way to, at least in my head. And all of this starts by cloning the Explore Assistant repo, which has been dropped in the chat on LinkedIn. So everything that is going to follow this is kind of on the basis that you've done git clone on that repo and you have it locally in VS Code or Cursor or Sublime or whatever your text editor of choice is. And so let's talk about the backend setup. What happens in the backend setup is we're going to create the Vertex AI model that is going to generate the Looker queries. So basically the thing that takes the prompt that we saw and gives you the output. This, as I said, can be set up using BigQuery or Cloud Run. This is all like been fully Terraformed, so it's pretty easy to deploy whichever you want. For those who haven't used Terraform before, it's a way to have like cloud asset configuration as code where you can run commands from your local machine and deploy things very easily without having to go in and click a bunch of buttons. And so what I'm saying is in both cases, you basically just run two commands and it either builds it into BigQuery or builds it into Cloud Run. You'll want to use Cloud Run if you want to use this like as an API outside of the front end. I didn't, at least for the purposes of this demo. And so I've used BigQuery. And so what you need for this step is Terraform. You need to have that installed. You can find instructions for that online. And you need to have access to a project in GCP that you can deploy things to. Perfect. So three pretty simple steps for the backend: generate an authentication token, set environment variables, and run Terraform. First is generate an authentication token. This basically just gets used in a variety of the different deployment steps to make sure that things can talk to each other and that they know who is talking to themselves. There is a command to run from OpenSSL. You basically copy and paste this from the docs and run it. That's step one. Step two is to set some environment variables in your terminal. You basically want to export the GCP project ID that you're deploying this to. That can be a net new project. It can be an existing project. I chose to use a new project. It just seems easier, particularly when you're testing these things out for the first time, that you just like do it in an isolated environment and don't risk screwing up anything if you're an organization that uses GCP. And then there's just two environment variables depending on which backend you're using. So if you're using BigQuery, set it to 1, and the other one to 0, and vice versa if you're using Cloud Functions and Cloud Run. And then finally, you run Terraform plan and you run Terraform apply. You need to make sure you've moved into the Terraform folder in the Explore Assistant backend folder in the repo. But basically CD, move into those folders, and then run Terraform. And so it's, generate the authentication token, set some environment variables, run Terraform. If you have the right things installed, this can really take like less than a minute. And what you end up with is a couple different resources in GCP. You end up with a BigQuery dataset and table to upload examples to. You end up with a model to run Gemini Pro, that is the thing that is receiving the prompt. And you have a whole bunch of IAM permissions set up in your GCP project to basically let all of this run and the right things talk to each other. So that's the back end. And so what you've deployed is a model that's going to receive the prompt and a place basically to store all your examples in BigQuery. The second step is the most interesting one, I think, which is the loading and generating and loading of example data. The 3 steps here, like create a Python virtual env and install requirements. There's a Python script that you're going to need to run. Do not install Python requirements globally on your computer. Do use virtual environments and install them there. We then need to generate the training data, and then we need to upload that data to BigQuery. Generating a virtual environment and installing the requirements looks like this. Again, this is a screenshot from the docs. You can grab these directly out of the docs. out of the documentation itself from the GitHub repo, but what you'll have then is all of the requirements from the requirements.txt file that will be available on your machine. And then we generate the training data. And this, if you're using the example that they give, and you can actually find this data publicly available in BigQuery, like the data that the Explorer is built on, they provide a CS or a JSON file in the repo to do this. But if you're doing it on your own data, you'll need to generate your own training data. And so what the JSON file looks like for the training data is a list of JSON dictionaries that have the input, which is what like top 10 brand names or brands by sales, and then the URL string. And so to generate this data, what we'd recommend is going to your System Activity Explorer in Looker and finding the most used queries for your explorers and go and just like write labels for them. I think we've been at the Spectacle side, we've been thinking about like what does automating the generation of these labels look like on our side, and maybe we'll have some more to talk about in the future on that. But I think today, at least for the initial purposes of just getting some initial training data, go to your System Activity Explorer, generate the outputs of the most common queries, so the URL params for the most common queries that you have running on your explorers, and then go and label it and save this CSV file on your instance and kind of prepare it for being uploaded to BigQuery. The most data you can provide, the more data you can provide here, the better the quality of the output that you get from the Explorer Assistant is going to be, or from any LLM is going to be. And I haven't spoken to the team directly who have built this, but one thing we were thinking about was like for each basically output, possibly defining multiple inputs. You can say things in different ways. User by traffic source is maybe a bit simpler, but as you get into more complex questions, saying like, hey, here's one way you could put this input or another, and just like replicate those in your training data will likely improve your results, though I have not explicitly tested that. And then finally, once you have got these JSON files that you want to upload to BigQuery, there are scripts that they provide in the repo that say that use this loadexamples.py file to upload the examples. One thing to note, and I went wrong here, is you need to pass an Explorer ID for the the Explorer that you're deploying this for, and just make sure that the Explorer ID in the CLI argument that you're making, the terminal argument that you're making, is model name : Explorer name. And sorry, just one comment that I do want to highlight before I go on. Quentin's just made note that the repo proposes a way to generate labels using Vertex based on the history, which, sorry, I omitted there. When you are thinking on this prior slide of generating your training data, there are things that are proposed in the repo to do that. So follow that as well. And so upload to BigQuery, and what you then end up with is basically what you see here in BigQuery, which is a data set called, in my case, Explorer Assistant. You can configure that. A model, which is the Explorer Assistant LLM. That is the Gemini Pro model that we've deployed with Vertex in BigQuery, and then tables with examples and refinement examples, which is from the prior step. And so with all of that and the backend deployed, you're basically then ready for the final step, which is the front end. The front end is slightly more involved. You need to have NPM installed, and you need to have access to a Looker instance, which I'm sure you all do. And so quickly cruising through these, cd into the right folder, move into the right folder here, which is the Explorer Assistant extension one, run npm install. That's going to generate a package lock file and install all of the packages that are required by this application. This is highlighted in the docs, but if you need to find the right version of Node and npm, use nvm Node Version Manager to install the right one. And I think I did it with Node 18 was what I used when I was installing this. And so run npm install. That should hopefully go well, which are maybe famous last words for those who spent a lot of time with npm. But I had no issues when installing the extension. There's then the Looker setup. And so there's a couple steps here. You want to either set up a new connection or make sure that an existing connection has access to the example data set that we generated in the prior step. So you'll have generated a new data set with those tables, and you either need to ensure that an existing connection can access that data or set up a new connection that can access that data in BigQuery, because we're going to need to pass that connection explicitly. You then need to generate a new project, and generate a manifest file and a model file. And in that manifest file, you're basically going to copy and paste from the docs a whole bunch of stuff, which has the application and basically all of the configuration for the application, which is in this screenshot here. You can copy and paste that, put it in, generate a model file. The model file is just because a project needs a model with a connection for it all to work correctly, though it's not actually leveraging that connection. The connection in the model file can be whatever you want. We just need to have one there present in the project. You then need to configure the project, which basically just means go and click Manage Projects in Looker and click Configure and just make sure that it's basically live, and then deploy to production. And at that point, the Explore Assistant is going to be live. You'll be able to see it in the Applications dropdown of your Looker instance, but it's not quite ready to be used yet. So a couple final things we need to do. You need to set up a .env file, .m file in your code base where you are deploying this from. They provide an example of this. You can basically copy it, rename it, and fill it with values. The model and the Explore are the two that you have generated examples for and that you want to deploy the Explore Assistant for. The connection name is the one that has access to the examples. The model is the name of the model in BigQuery, which you can find by just going to the model. It's just the fully qualified name. And then the name of the connection in BigQuery for the examples and the name of the data set in BigQuery for the examples. And so you set all that. You just save it. You don't need to run a command or anything at this point. And then you then run npm run start, which is going to run the web server that serves the file that kind of coordinates all of the things from the extension. And so you're going to be running that locally, at which point you can then start running using the assistant. And so with the server running locally, you can run and ask all your questions and you're good to go. Now, eventually you're going to want to run that server in the cloud somewhere, or what you can do is do npm run build, which will generate like a bundle.js file that you save in your Looker project and change the reference to that. The docs are really good here, but the idea is that there's basically a bunch of JavaScript code that either needs to be available on the internet, either from your local host or on the internet, or you want to bundle that all up, save it in the project directly, and have it accessed directly from the project. And then you'll have this, which is where we started today's presentation. You'll have the Explorer Assistant installed in your instance. Now, you can do this for multiple Explorers. You'll have multiple different applications in your Looker instance, but you can do this for multiple Explorers if you want to. I've actually done that on our side. And so you just need to kind of replicate not all of these steps, but some of these steps, things like the example generation, things like the deploying the front end to a new project, that needs to be replicated. But things like the backend, it can use the same backend and things like that. I appreciate that was a pretty quick view through the installation steps, but what I really wanted to highlight is kind of these three major components. There's a backend, which is a model. There's examples that live in BigQuery, and there are a front end, a React application that you serve either from a web server or that you like bundle and put into the repository itself, the Looker project itself for use from there. And then you can play around with this. We've got a couple more slides and then I will answer some questions. Further things that this has like made us think about and that you might want to think about as you go down this path. And some of the folks from Google who are on the call on the chat may be able to answer some of this as well. But what's really cool about this model, this like way of doing this, is that with the prompt stuffing, you kind of like have this single prompt that doesn't require a trained model, that kind of has everything in one go, means that credentials are never passed to the model, that means that data access to the database are never passed in the model. And it's a really cool idea. And it works really effectively from what we've seen. But at a certain scale or for a certain level of effectiveness, there's a couple things you may want to do. Using embeddings to improve the prompt, I think there's a couple different ways that this could work. An embedding is like a vector representation of a string. And vectors that are most similar to each other, or strings that are most similar to each other, will have vectors that are most similar to each other, but it's a much easier way to compare them. And so I can imagine a world where instead of loading, let's say, all of the metadata from the Explorer or all of the examples from the Explorer, you use embeddings to only insert, to only stuff in metadata and example training data that is most relevant to your question, which at a level of scale may be something that you need to do. And what's cool is you can generate embeddings in a BigQuery now. So there's you could kind of do all that natively with the existing infrastructure that we've just deployed. The other side of it, which I probably wouldn't recommend, the embeddings I probably would, and using a pre-trained model I probably wouldn't. It's just probably a lot of effort, but you could go down the path with Vertex AI of generating your own pre-trained model that is like better at this notionally than Gemini Pro is. I haven't tested that. I think I would go as far as you can with like embeddings and prompt stuffing before you think about training your own model. But it is something that you could do. The auto generation of training data we've talked about. And a big thing I want to highlight is that like conversational analytics is coming to Looker. It is a thing that you should expect later this year. I think it is likely to be a SKU, like an additional SKU for Looker that you might need to buy, but it is a thing that is coming. And so if all of what I've just described is like, hey, that's really nice, but I'm not going to go to all this effort, we're probably not that far away from you being able to just like buy this as part of your Looker experience as well. I'm going to jump to a Q&A now, but I think that the main thing I want to highlight is around that prompt and how it is built. Because really, as I said, with some API calls, if you forget the UI and forget everything else, you can do really cool things with grabbing metadata, grabbing some examples, and just like building a really well-written prompt with all the right context that gives you the right information. And that to me is the coolest part of this. It's the bit that I think like to the Google guys, I'm most impressed by. It's really impressive, both like how the prompt was written and how Gemini works, that this all kind of works in the way that it does, and with like all of the security that comes with that. Perfect. We're going to get to Q&A in just a second, but before we do, if this was interesting and you want to think more about like what is the actual changes to the LookML side that I might want to do to get my project Gen AI ready and conversational analytics ready, join us in 2 weeks. Sign up on our website. That is the wrong date. That is next week, and in fact, it is the 29th, not the 22nd. So ignore that. Just in 2 weeks' time and you can sign up on our website and on LinkedIn. I'm going to jump here, and we're going to just grab some of these questions. If you do have questions, please just fire their way. I can see there's been a ton of conversation happening, so I'm going to try to scroll through some of these. But if you have questions that I can answer, or if you don't mind reposting them so they show up at the bottom, that would be great. And I appreciate we're at the 45 minutes. So if you also need to run, really appreciate you joining us today. I love how much conversation has happened in the chat. And yeah, I'm going to hang around for the next 15 minutes or so for as long as we have questions, and answer as many as we can. And I apologize if I'm answering questions that have already been answered in the chat, but I will go from here. So how to differentiate a different explorer? It's really just in that .m file. So here we go. I can show this. I think there we go. So how to differentiate for a different explorer. So in that .m file, you can just say, hey, I want this model in this explorer. And as long as there's training data for that, you basically build a new project bundled with those environment variables, and it will just point to that explorer. So you basically need to do the training step again and the front-end deployment step again, just changing the environment variables that point to the explorer and the model. And you could really do that for as many as you want. The only downside is that they're just going to show up as different applications in the front end of your application. Let's scroll through and find a couple more answers. Will the deck be available after the webinar? Yes. If you go to spectacles.dev, not like in 5 minutes, but this time tomorrow, you will see the slides there on our website, spectacles.dev/webinars. You can see all of our webinars there. We make the slides available. We make this video available, and you'll be able to see it there within the next 24 hours. Another question, can we only connect to BigQuery? Interested in knowing if connecting with other sources such as Databricks or Snowflake is on the roadmap. I can't speak for the Google team. All of this is open source though, so it seems totally reasonable to me that you could go in and make this work with Databricks or Snowflake. Again, I don't want to speak for the Google team. My understanding is that like this Explore Assistant is probably not going to become a production thing in Looker. I may be wrong, but like really, I think this is more built to show you an example of what you can do in Looker with Looker and Vertex AI, rather than being like the building block to the next like production bit of it. But all the code is open source. They're actively working on it. I've seen commits even while I've been working on it the last couple of weeks. So you can also just go and create an issue there in GitHub, which I'm sure they'll answer to. But equally, you could just have a look and open a pull request to fork it, or whatever you want there to make it work. Some questions around the cost per token that I will let you all look in the thread for. I think that might be it. Oh, question from TJ, which is across a couple of comments, so I'll maybe show this one. The question is, have we looked at extension gen AI yet? No, we have not, or not in depth, and certainly not as much in depth as the one that I've demoed today. It is probably on our roadmap to do a deep dive in it, and I'm sure we'll do a webinar on it, but we just haven't spent as much time with it yet. I think the Explore Assistant was just, like, for a variety of reasons, more interesting to us, and it's what we chose to dig into first. But yeah, like, watch this space. And then I guess maybe the final question for today is a comment from Khaled saying, I'd imagine that even with conversational analytics, we still need to dedicate time to training the data, which could constitute the bulk of the work. Do you think this process will become easier in the future? I guess there's a couple points there. I don't know. Again, haven't spoken to the Google team about this specifically. I do not know if conversational analytics will require you to provide training data, or whether they have found ways to kind of like self-train or use like the usage of it to train the model over time or provide training data over time. So I wouldn't necessarily take for granted that you will need to provide training data, but I don't know one way or the other. And then on the second bit, like, do I think this will become easier in the future? Yes, I do. I do think that people, I mean, there's examples of it in the repo already, but I do think there will become either like scripts or tools or a variety of things to make like the labeling of data more efficient and easier. I think we're in the early days of this stuff, and but even like off the top of your head, you can think about ways where you just like, I mean, it's kind of what they recommend in the repo. It's just like take URLs, get suggested labels of it from Gemini, review those. I mean, there's still work, but you can probably like get yourself 80% of the way there, and then review auto-generated labels, enrich them, create duplicates of them, things like that as you go. But I do think it'll become easier, and I think there's no guarantee that it is going to be a required step for conversational analytics when it does come. And I think, unless I've missed any obvious questions, I think that is all for today. So thank you very much. Oh, we got a couple more questions. Sorry, I missed these at the bottom. How much time would you estimate spending on initial setup, including data labeling, training? I used their examples already. So when I went through this, I didn't train my own data. I used their examples. And it probably took me like 90 minutes to get this working, like deployed. I'm pretty familiar with Terraform and with like to some degree with NPM, so it could take you longer. But I think this question hints at like the data labeling is the longest bit. That will definitely be the longest bit. So like however long the data labeling takes, and I don't have a good sense of that. I think it's hours certainly. Like take that, add on a small bit. That's the deployment bit. The training bit, as is like always the case with AI, machine learning, whatever we're calling it these days, like that is going to be the time-consuming bit for you. And then perfect, Yasha, you have queued me up perfectly. So thank you for this. Is there anything we can do in the LookML other than adding context in the description to help the prompt return correct results? Yes, there are. And as Josh has said in the comments, join us in 2 weeks. We're going to cover all the things you can do. And I love finishing on a cliffhanger, but join us in 2 weeks. We will let you know the answer to that question. And I know that the link to that is in the comments now. So head over there, sign up, and make sure you attend that. And then here's the link to it, except May 29th, not May 22nd. And so finally, we are Spectacles. We help organizations of all sizes really improve their Looker instance. If you would like to have a conversation with us or want to have a demo, a trial, whatever it is, head to our website and get in touch. We're also just like always very happy to just talk Looker. If you have questions, if you want to talk about some of this stuff, So please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you join us on future webinars. And I really appreciate you all joining today. This has been such a good turnout, particularly for the first one on LinkedIn and changing the software and all of that. Seeing the chat come down the side has been awesome. And so hopefully you'll join us in 2 weeks. And again, just thank you again for your attendance, and we will see you soon. Thank you very much.